Lori, Catherine. Just as people are popping up on my window, I know there's a lot more folks I know that are here. Hello, everybody. All right. Well, Bernie, should we go ahead and get the train rolling? And it's 10:04.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is GP McLeer. I'm the facilitator for the Advocacy Allies Peer Network. And then we also have today Bernie Mazyck, who's with the South Carolina Association for Community Economic Development, better known as SCACED. He's the director, president, CEO there. And Amber, his counterpart, his legislative counterpart at SCACED, was unable to be here today. She's under the weather. We hope she gets to feeling better. I also sound like I'm emerging from one as well, so apologies in advance if I cough or anything, but I'm on the mend. I also wanted to quickly thank our Advocacy Allies leadership team. Bernie is a member of that leadership team, and so is Katie Smith, who's on this call. And then also want to give a quick shout out to Jeff McCormick at the Grant, who's chair of Grant Makers Network, is also here. And then of course, Ben Bullock and Des Monet from Together SC staff are also here today. Thank you all so much for everything you do for the nonprofit sector in this state. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit of Summit prep work, and then most of the time spent on a legislative update. The goal of today is to try and make sure that if you're attending the summit, that you're well prepared for that summit. And even if you're not, that you walk away with a pretty good pulse on what's going on at the State House, so that even if you're not in Columbia, you can help in March. You can help raise the voice of nonprofits back home or virtually through email and anytime you see your legislators. So we actually are going to hopefully have this more of a conversation between Bernie and I, and then of course take questions or any additional insights. If y'all wouldn't mind, so that we kind of know who's here, and y'all could start with the chat box of saying your name and your organization. We'd love to make sure we have all y'all engage in that way. And then also, if you have questions, please be sure to put them in the chat box if you can first, so that we can kind of keep tabs on that and make sure they get answered in a timely manner. So throughout this, I'm going to kick things off though with a little bit about the summit, which this year includes a lot of focus on policy and partnership. I am going to share my screen for a little bit here, and so that in case you haven't seen the summit schedule, that you can see it. And I'm going to kind of go through it and give you some insights onto how things are structured, and so hopefully you emerge ready to go in March. The summit is March 7th, 8th, and 9th in Columbia. For the first time in about 20 years, I believe, almost to the day, this does include a State House Day or a policy-focused day. So we're terribly excited for that. Together SC has done a lot of work in advocacy over the last few years intentionally, and we're excited to put all that together. If you go to the Summit website, which is summit.togethersc.org, you can find all the information about the Summit. So first and foremost, if you take nothing away about the Summit, at least go to the website and you can find everything there you need. But we wanted to highlight a little bit of the first and third day, but really the second day, which is more advocacy focused. So on March 7th, you're going to see a lot of tactile sessions that you come to expect from Together SC's great summits over the years, focused on operations, development, and leadership, and a bunch of other areas. Be sure to dig in on these. There's a lot of great sessions for you and your team members. This day is built for anybody on a nonprofit staff at any level to find something engaging for them. And so please be sure to look through that. There's some really great things going on. Debbie Nelson, who many of you know, is leading the day on that day, and has done a great job putting together some panels and some presentations covering all areas of nonprofit operations. So be sure to check that out. That is Tuesday, March 9th. On Wednesday, March 8th is, well, I'm going to go fast forward to the 9th real quick because the 8th is very relevant to everybody on this call in particular. But the 9th is sort of focused on CEOs and boards. So there's a lot of focus on leadership and partnership between executive level leadership and board members. Charles Weathers is leading that day, and Charles is fantastic. If you haven't had a session with him before, he's wonderful. And it is a shorter day. It runs until about 12:15, 12:30, but some really in-depth conversations for leadership at your nonprofit. So Wednesday, go back one day. Wednesday, March 8th is all about policy and partnerships. I'm just going to kind of run down. I'm not going to go through every session. You all can visit the website and see it, but we will kick things off in the morning with the keynote speaker for the conference is Tom Barkin. He's the president and CEO of the Richmond Federal Reserve Bank, and he's going to be, in short, talking about how nonprofits are a part of a lot of those metrics that the Fed uses at the national level to help inform monetary policy. We hope that our intention on this is that you walk away from the keynote and the panel right afterwards, which includes Bernie and some other folks. You walk away seeing just how important your work is on the ground in your community, that it really does impact not just the community you serve, of course, immediately, but also in aggregate, our sector has a lasting impact on the health of our state and our nation. So that should be a really great conversation for any nonprofit to listen in on. We also have invited, yes, Bernie.
GP, and if I can add, Tom, when you think of the president of the Federal Reserve Bank or any of the presidents of the Federal Reserve Banks, you may think of them as strictly economists that only focuses on the numbers, the metrics, but Tom is a little different. He's not an economist, so he looks at a number of factors in his decisions related to monetary policy. And since I serve on the Richmond, the Charlotte branch board of the Fed, I bring a lot of that information to him that helps in his decisions related to monetary policy. So you play a very important role in his thoughts and decisions about monetary policy.
It'll be a different conversation than I think a lot of nonprofits are used to having about their work, and I really look forward to it. It should be pretty eye-opening. And thank Bernie and Madeline as well serves on an advisory role to the Richmond Federal Reserve and a couple others, I think, from around South Carolina's nonprofit network. So thank you all for what you do with them as well. After that keynote, we'll get into the sessions. Wednesday has 2 blocks of sessions, a morning block and an afternoon block. And as you go through these morning block sessions, you'll kind of see a little bit of a theme. They're all sort of sector focused or subsector focused, however you want to think about it. There's conversations about transportation, natural resources and conservation, child care and children, veterans, health equity, and education and others, things that a lot of you work in every single day that we'll find. There's housing is another big one on this list. You'll see really good conversations about those topics. All of these are structured, with the exception of one session. All of these are structured as panel discussions. So you will hear from the ideal panel, and there's a couple variations of this as you go through the day, but include a nonprofit, a philanthropic partner, a corporate partner, and a state agency partner. Some combination of those 4 types of groups are involved in every panel. And the highlight is how are we working together to help advance South Carolina and help solve some of the issues that this state is facing as a team. And so there will be really great conversations about all of these topics, about the policy issues that we're all working on to help some of the problems in these certain sectors, as well as some of the opportunities to partner with each other. So there's some really great folks, and so I encourage you to go through and look at all of the panels. We have lunch with our peers, and we continue into the afternoon. We have a little bit of a shorter block of sessions that these are a little bit more cross sector. So these are areas that all of us are going to be working in that have some policy work attached to it. Things like inclusive workforce development and partnering for good. That's that's a corporate panel of folks from Michelin, Unum Bank, State Ports Authority, Boeing, and the Duke Energy Foundation, talking about why and how they partner with nonprofits to help move the state forward. And it's a really great, with a little bit of a policy tinge to it, of how are they partnering with nonprofits to help those issues and why that's important to them. We also have Medicaid Expansion 101, which is really just giving the ground level of what is that. There are a lot of folks working in that field on that issue in the nonprofit sector. And so we've got a great panel to talk about, give us some baseline understanding of what that is to begin with. And we also have one session that's focused on that Amber Stewart on SCACED's team and myself will be leading on kind of giving some basic advocacy and a legislative update of how the state house works for a reason. Because after these afternoon sessions, we're all heading over to the state house. So we will spend the late afternoon at the State House visiting with legislators. You can view more about that on the website about what we mean by that and how you can find your path at the State House, whether you're a novice or someone who's been there a couple times or an expert in the field and of advocacy. We'll have a couple opportunities to engage at the State House. From being recognized in the gallery to a joint resolution that's being introduced soon to celebrate nonprofits and philanthropic partners, and then of course in meeting with individual legislators as you can. Should be a great opportunity for you to have a little bit more advocacy experience or an experience in advocacy than you would have other years at Summit. And then we'll cap off the night with a legislative reception. All legislators have been invited to attend, and will continue to be invited to attend this legislative reception at the Columbia Museum of Art that evening. Its honorary co-hosts are Senator Katrina Shealy, who chairs the Family Services and Veterans Committee in the Senate, and Representative Bruce Bannister, who's chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. Those will be our honorary co-hosts. We also are presenting the Governor's Awards for volunteers, Governor's Volunteer Awards during that reception. And that list, I think, has just been announced by the Volunteer Commission. And we look forward to having that as well. So that's a little bit about the summit and why we think it's a great opportunity to come and what you can expect, especially on that Wednesday. The hotel block, I believe, runs out either this week or early next week. Desmond or Ben may want to throw that in the chat of when that happens. I forget. So we've got a lot of great things for everybody to experience and be a part of during the summit. I want to give a shout out to and an opportunity for Katie Smith, if you're still on the call, and Catherine Schumacher. Y'all are working together in Greenville to help get nonprofits together with some organized visits to the State House. And I just want to know if maybe you wanted to throw out that what you guys are doing so that folks can kind of see an example of what they could do at the State House. I'm sorry to put y'all on the spot. But.
Ironically, Katie and I were just texting each other behind the scenes. So you literally called us out as we were secretly communicating. So
it was advocacy related. It was pressing advocacy related, though.
It was absolutely. So we are looking at having sort of the Greenville nonprofits try to reserve room so that we can invite our electeds to just sort of drop by and visit with us, and people can sort of be in that room. So that's a little bit of a work in progress, but that is what we're going to try and explore doing, just to sort of give an opportunity for the Greenville delegation in particular, or any other committee chairs who are, in the Greenville zone where they're doing work that's related to Greenville, they can come and talk to us. So I think, Katie, is that all I need to say? That's our plan.
Yeah, and in terms of if you all want to replicate it in some way with your folks, we put in our last newsletter and then at our advocacy roundtable, the invitation to let us know if people plan to participate so we know who it is we're trying to coordinate. And I had it in my mind to reach out to you, GP, and to Madeline and Ben if you could share a list of who is coming from our county so that we could reach out to them and coordinate, kind of using the model of Foundations on the Hill, which folks in philanthropy participate in, of having our shared talking points and bringing us in mass together. So we are so grateful to Together SC for having this platform for us to just sit upon and hopefully do great work.
Thank you all so much. And I know there are potential other groups looking at doing similar things, either through affinity of work or location. And so I think I appreciate y'all taking the lead for the Greenville area, for Greenville County. The state house visits are a little bit of choose your own adventure. Those who are novices and just want to go to maybe haven't been to the state house in quite some time and want to kind of get the wheels turning, or your team hasn't had that experience, you know, you'll be able to do that, and we'll have a little bit of a moment for yay nonprofits with a presentation of a joint resolution. You'll be able to pull members out of the lobby or go sit on a committee hearing if you'd like. And for those of you who have existing relationships with legislators or want to see if you can start one, you'll be able to go over to their offices and start that process. So anyway, I could talk for the summit all day, but we have a lot more to cover. And while y'all are here today, want to jump back into this legislative update. If you have any questions about the summit, please put them in the chat. I know Ben's here, Desmond is here. They may be able to answer those, or visit the Summit website as well, and continue to register if you haven't already. So turning things back over to the legislature. Bernie, it's been a lot has happened. It is the start of a 2-year session. So legislature operates in 2-year cycles. Anything that wasn't approved or voted on last year is gone. It had to be recycled. It had to be resubmitted, refiled, and reheard. And that process began January 10th. We have a couple buckets of stuff we're going to cover today. One is a very quick hit on ARPA. We're not going to dig in too much on it, but just a quick hit there. We're going to talk a little bit about what those impacts from the election, how they played themselves out. It's a little bit of a refresher. If you've watched our legislative updates from before or read our newsletter, you'll know most of it. We're just going to remind you of some of those key moves. And then we're going to talk a little bit about things that have moved pretty fast so far. And then we've got 2 big themes that Bernie and I talked about in a prep call that really have emerged as pretty helpful guideposts to consider that we're already watching happen in real time. I believe I'm going to start with a little bit of an ARPA and a little bit of election, and then Bernie's going to help me fill in, and we'll see where the conversation goes from there. There was about a $580 million balance of ARPA money after phase 1 was approved last year. You may remember they went into a couple big buckets like broadband, sewer, and water. Well, those buckets ran out, especially in sewer and water. The legislature it's in the Senate now, but the House has already passed a proposal to send the remaining balance of ARPA funding to sewer and water grants. With existing funds that they appropriated last year, they were only going to be able to fill about 53% of the total grant applications they got from cities, sewer authorities, and counties. With this, they'll be able to fund about 70% of those. That's how much need is out there in sewer and water. So there were also a lot of requests from other entities to get some of that ARPA money, and this seems like for the wearing the legislature's hat, an easier path of least resistance to get that money out the door as fast as possible. For those interested in the nonprofit conversation with ARPA money, those are still sort of happening. Obviously not about ARPA, but about how can nonprofits find an easier access point and build a stronger relationship with the State House. Those conversations are still ongoing, and we'll get to that at another date when we can. The election impact, there's a lot of new faces. Almost a third of the 124 House of Representative members are new faces. And there's also new leadership. There's a new speaker, a new chair of Ways and Means. There's about 5 new committee chairs in the State House. So there's a lot going on. Bernie, do you want to talk a little bit about the new speaker, Merle Smith?
Sure. And although these are individuals that are new in their leadership role, they have been in the legislature for a while. Merle Smith previously was chairman of Ways and Means. That is where at least I and a number of my constituents had the opportunity to work with him. He is one that really engages people and want to know how policies impact folk in the community. He's been an ally of the community development industry. And as a matter of fact, just as a show of how he engages, SCACED had our legislative luncheon February 1st, and he came. He wasn't there long, but he came. So to me, that shows that he continues to want to be accessible, and he wants to hear from you. So I think he's going to be trying to balance all of these different factions within the General Assembly. And then our new Ways and Means Chairman is Bruce Bannister. We look, of course, very closely at Ways and Means because anything that's related to the budget, that's where it goes. So he's the new chairman of Ways and Means. He's from Greenville. Sorry, Merle is from Sumter. So you kind of have a rural level of appreciation there. Chairman Bannister is from Greenville, urban, but he too is accessible. We met with him a couple of times last year, and he has heard our concerns, especially related to housing and some other issues. So again, leadership, but have been around for a while. And there are some other committee chairs that are new as well. Those I'm not as familiar with. On the Senate side, the president of the Senate, Senator Alexander, from Walhalla, South Carolina, again, having a sense and understanding and appreciation for rural. And so he's also been, at least from our standpoint, has been pretty accessible, and we've enjoyed opportunities to engage him in meetings as well. And then the chairman of Senate Finance is Senator Harvey Peeler. He's new in that role. He's from Cherokee County and serves that part of the state. We are not as familiar with his areas of thought, but in the past, he's at least been receptive to nonprofit and community efforts. So those are the large, high-level principal leaders in the state legislature, all of whom have been there for a while. So you kind of have an institutional framework there. Even though, as GP said, almost a third of the body are new, you still have veteran leadership there as well. And GP, any other thoughts you have about that?
No, I think those four positions in particular, Senate President, Senate Finance, Speaker, and Ways and Means, are sort of some of the more consequential leadership changes. Changes on the House side, at least. There are a lot of, like Bernie said, other committee chairs that are changed, and of course those groups operating in the law and the laws or regulations under those. Obviously, there's a new chairwoman of Senate of Health, Education, and Public Works, for instance. There's a lot of work in education. So committee chairs are important, but those four in particular are important to note just because tend to be the most powerful individuals in the legislature. And
GP, I'll add also that there were no changes in the Senate because there was not really an election of the Senate. So from the Senate standpoint, you basically have the same dynamics you had during the last 2 years. The House is where there was some movement, some changes. The Republican caucus has a supermajority now. So that does what that does. But the Senate is, I would say, the stable body right now.
Yes, and all senators and all House members are up in 24. So it's going to be quite the year. That's for another webinar, though. So right now, but so as Bernie said, the House now has a supermajority in the GOP. There are some internal factions, which you have probably read about. If you're on this call, most likely you have, that have has been a new factor to watch play out in real time at the State House. It also, though, has that supermajority in general, just on its surface, has sped a lot of things up as well. We're not going to dig into all of these issues on what happened, and because these aren't necessarily all nonprofit related, although many nonprofits worked on these issues in various ways. But the Senate passed education savings accounts, ESAs, better known as their school choice bill, pretty quickly, although that took 3 weeks of debate to pass in the Senate. The Senate also passed certificate of need reform or repeal, which impacts hospitals and health facilities across the state and where they can go. The House also, the bigger issues that they've already gotten out of their chamber include the abortion bill, the House abortion bill, which last week came out of the House and passed, as well as it's been dubbed the CRT bill related to educational content. That also passed the House. What you saw was some of those go through the committee process pretty quickly early on, and then once they got to the floor, we're slowed down a little bit with various amendments, but ultimately the supermajority played out, and we saw ultimate passage of a lot of these. There's a lot of other bills too, of course, but those I think what's important to note, and Bernie can add to this because he monitors a lot of bills that are still waiting in committees. It not only did it take up a lot of time and obviously a lot of efforts from a lot of nonprofits while those things were debated on the floors of various bodies, but the trickle down impact of spending 3 weeks on ESA bill, for instance, meant that Senate committees didn't really meet. And Bernie, do you want to talk a little bit about the crunch that why it's important to note what takes up oxygen?
Sure, because there may be legislation that you're interested in, legislation you may even have a senator or House member who's filed legislation that you're interested in, that has pretty much held up those bills from moving forward. All bills, of course, once they're read the first time across the desk in the House and the Senate, go to a committee and then ideally to a subcommittee. So depending on what legislation you're interested in moving forward, over the last 3-4 weeks, some of these larger bills, I shouldn't say larger bills, some of these bills that have been of interest to the Republican caucus have taken up time, both in debate at the committee level and then floor debate. So this other legislation has kind of slowed down, got backed up, I guess you can say, in the line. So if you're concerned that your legislation has not moved forward, right now I wouldn't be too concerned. It's just because these other bills have taken up a lot of debate. Now since we do have a May adjournment, yes, that does cause for concern as far as timing is concerned. But I mean, you still can really work closely with your senator and House member to really kind of move these pieces forward. And then, of course, what's going to come soon, and it's already being worked on, is the budget. That's another big time item that, of course, it starts in the House. So a number of the subcommittees, maybe all of the subcommittees, have met with their respective agencies. And so in the next week or so, you're going to start seeing the budget take shape, and that debate will also begin to put a time crunch on legislation you might be interested in.
Yeah, I would agree that the budget is the one that's going to be active starting pretty soon with the House, but then also in the Senate finance subcommittees will begin meeting soon on their hearings for different agencies. So what you will see is the Senate, which much like the House did, start having really short sessions soon during the day, just so the Senate Finance Committee can get through the budget hearings, because the budget is the one thing the legislature has to approve every year by law. So that takes up a lot of time too, rightfully so in many ways. and you don't want to really speed through a budget of $10 billion, so, or more even. I think one thing that
GP,
Bernie.
can I say one more thing about the budget? And maybe you've heard some more intelligence than I have. The legislative year started with at least a thought of over the projected revenue to the state is projected to be in somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 billion surplus. Now I know there's some things with the comptroller that may have complicated that, but at least the hope is that that's still gonna hold true. GP, I don't know if you've heard any updates on that lately.
No, I haven't reviewed so new numbers would have come out February 15th from the Bureau of Economic and Advisors for the state, the BEA estimate. But last Friday, I was in a meeting with Chairman Bruce Bannister. I call it the Bannister Budget Briefing, the BBB, and it was pretty insightful. There's $3 billion in non-recurring funds right now expected, and $1 billion in recurring, and that was as of last Friday. So he also one little insight that I think is worth sharing for folks, and this leads into our next topic, Bernie. One of the big themes we have is they do expect a pretty robust floor fight during the budget, and that is going to be, so if you want, I hope everyone on this call finds it entertaining television, but the State House floor feeds when the budget starts to hit the floor for debate will be something. So the budget still has not come together officially. I think they're starting work over this weekend really on putting things together. It will go through, each subcommittee will approve their budget in the House. It'll go to the Full Ways and Means Committee. So those things, there may be a lot of debate during that process, but it won't hit the House floor until March. I'm going to have the exact date wrong, like 12th or something like that week of March. The week after the summit, actually. The week of the summit is the week that the budget is actually in everyone's hands in the House to read through. So it's a pretty good time to meet with legislators and talk about what is they are going to vote on the next week for the House. So, but that does get into this whole idea of the floor fight thing. Gets into one of the themes that Bernie and I have talked about. We wanted to be sure to hit on today, as we start this legislative cycle with the new landscape we've talked about with leadership and the supermajority caucus, as well as this lingering, this election that's happening in 24. Rules was one of the themes that Bernie and I kind of highlighted. And Bernie sort of talked about he touched on something that when bills are read, when bills come up, our first file, they have to be assigned to a committee. So one of the rules that changed recently with Speaker Merle Smith is that you can't just run up to the desk and give a bill and then he'll go, okay, it goes to this committee. The Speaker of the House has a lot of control over which bills go to what committee. He has essentially universal control. With the exception of probably the obvious things. The budget can't not go to the budget, the House Ways and Means Committee. But he has a lot of latitude in that discretion. He has placed a restriction on himself that he will wait 24 hours to determine which bill goes to which committee. So that's just one little, we're not going to go through every single rule change, but the idea that there are new changes to rules or discussions of rules, or more importantly, Brian, for you to respond to this, the use of rules to facilitate a lot more rigorous debate where factions within various parties or subsects of those parties are starting to emerge. And Bernie, I want to turn it over to you to kind of react to that.
Yeah, and before I get too deep into that, one of the rule changes that I learned this year, and I don't know how many of you have engaged legislators to get certain line items in the budget or what have you, but one rule, in the past, you may have been able to talk to a legislator and they'll go ahead and try to make it happen. This year, there was a form you had to fill out. Well, the legislator had to fill out. If you even go to a legislator and say, we'd like, $5 million to go to DSS for X, that legislator wouldn't just go to that subcommittee and say, we want to have that happen. they have to fill out a form. So if you are working with a legislator on that, they may turn to you and say, here's the form that I have to turn in. I need you to write it out as to what you want. So that was one of the rule changes that occurred specifically related to the budget. Now, one of the themes that the supermajority, and I would dare say, and there is a 20-person Freedom Caucus in the House now. And debate and transparency has kind of been a theme. So they're using the rules to make sure that there's a lot more debate on items that that they want to see happen, and using those rules. And it can get really complicated, and sometimes I have difficulty following on the floor. Say that if there's a piece of legislation that is up for a vote, and you'll see the vote tallies coming in, and then all of a sudden someone that they may not have voted yet, but someone that you thought was in favor of your piece of legislation may vote against it, so that they can recall that piece of legislation to come back up later, so that they can work on getting more folk in support of it. So, but a lot of what I think have been part of the rules this time was to encourage more debate. I've even heard or saw an article written in the Post and Courier about the Freedom Caucus, that they want to mirror their work similar to the Freedom Caucus in the U.S. Congress. So the rules is how I think a lot of that has been so far been part of how they wanted to get their issues moving along. So that's my observation about the rules.
Yeah, I would also say that if you watch the U.S. speaker election, which I did because that's Catherine noted in the chat, I have an interesting idea of entertainment. But there was a lot of back and forth between now Speaker McCarthy and his caucus on rule changes. That mentality has trickled down to state level. You saw, as Bernie mentioned, there is a larger Freedom Caucus at the State House now, who had some issues with the Republican Party's, the GOP caucus, which is the formal caucus at the State House, of the rules set by the caucus to be a member. And so you saw some of that debate spill itself out into the floor. For instance, the ARPA money that we talked about, the sewer and water grants, $580 million, took a lot longer to pass than originally anticipated because of the external debate occurring around GOP caucus rules. And so you'll see amendments put up to help prove points about different things, and to put people in a spot of defining their political alignment. And so you're starting to see a lot of the rules be very important, because it's also come down to the committees. I know there was a press conference or so the other week about that committee hearings, subcommittee hearings in particular, are typically the only place that public comment is sought in the process. That's the way it's always been, for better or for worse. That's the way it has been. But more recently, the rules around how much time you have to comment, which meetings are live streamed, are all sort of changing. And so those rules are impacting, a nonprofit's ability to monitor and advocate, and those can be leveraged depending on your position on a particular matter. So there's a lot of the rules now almost mean, they've always meant a lot, of course, but being seen as a tool instead of a process is sort of a little bit of shift that, for those who want to stay pretty politically astute to what's going on, is going to be much more important, I believe, going forward.
And if I can, GP, I will add to kind of keep your eyes glued to the committee schedule that is available on the House website, and you can email and be alerted to when various committees are meeting, and you will get an email sometimes a day, depending on when the meeting is scheduled, but hopefully a few days prior to when a committee or subcommittee is meeting. So you can send an email to the House and ask to be notified of various committee meetings. You may rue the day you do that because you're going to be getting notification quite often when those committees meet. So that's something also, but definitely at the subcommittee level is really where there can be, you can lean in, I guess, with legislators that can speak on behalf of a piece of legislation you're interested in. Usually at the full committee level, it's more difficult there, but the subcommittee level is really what you want to pay close attention to. And then, of course, you can't do anything on the floor other than send notes in to different legislators and ask them to come out and talk to you about a particular piece of legislation.
Which leads to our second big theme today. So our first theme of navigating our legislative update and what's going on is that rules matter. The second one is the relationships and education of legislators matter. So advocacy really matters. As Bernie mentioned, once you get to the floor, there is no mechanism for you to provide comment. That's debate among members only. And as we've mentioned, there's been a couple instances, and we predict a lot more, of a lot of debate occurring on the floor, more so than you may have seen, especially on topics that maybe normally didn't. There's some you expect a lot of debate, some you don't. So it's all knowing the person is just as important as knowing the position now. It always has been, but you're seeing it take a new level of importance because at the end of the day, as Bernie said, there's no way for you to have a voice on that floor. You can't take the podium. So the member who is in your corner, or your constituent's corner, your client's corner as a nonprofit, your mission's corner, they're going to have to be empowered more than ever to make that case from the well.
And giving them real crisp, brief, but meaningful talking points is vital. Don't write them an essay, give them one sheet of paper, maybe a half sheet with specific talking points. I have actually witnessed in the Senate, one of our allies using the talking points that we gave him chapter, line, and verse. And I would also use this opportunity to say, please don't discount legislators based on political parties. Three pieces of legislation that we're interested in are all sponsored by Republicans, at least on the Senate side and some in the House. So that relationship is really important. And we encourage you, of course, year round, building that relationship, meeting with folks, making sure that they know you, they understand you and your issue, and so that you can help them understand maybe a trigger phrase like affordable housing that doesn't work well with a certain constituency. You can help them understand, well, maybe we're talking about workforce housing or attainable housing, and oh, okay, I understand what you're talking about there. So you do that, of course, off season to help them understand and to be able to share with their colleagues in the body what we really mean by those terms.
I think, Bernie, SCACED is a great example of two particular issues. One that is now like at the forefront of everyone's mind, and has money behind it, broadband, and then the second one is housing, which is becoming you can't just not talk about it anymore. I was at the South Carolina Auto Summit the last few days for my role at the Upstate Mobility Alliance, and heard from the director of the Mercedes-Benz plant, the president of Mercedes-Benz Vans LLC, about the need for housing as one of his concerns for that. So, Bernie, you want to talk about, we have to be ready to help legislators get ready. And so that doesn't mean that, oh my gosh, they're about to talk, who's my legislator, let me send them some bullet points. But broadband, for instance, was not a one-year push. It was a multi-year push that has yielded its fruit.
And it's interesting about broadband because we started talking about broadband, especially access to rural communities and broadband, years ago. And we were working with folk that weren't really high on the radar of legislators on this issue. But because we started work in the communities talking about broadband, and what really elevated the need for broadband was the pandemic. You know, someone said it never wastes a good disaster. And we definitely, the pandemic was a disaster, was a natural and health disaster. But we were already talking about that. And so the pandemic really put an emphasis on broadband, so much so that when the ARPA funds came down and frankly, the infrastructure bill was passed, there was huge chunks of money available for broadband access in there. And so having started doing that work years ago is now placing the communities we're concerned about in a good position to get access to those resources, and working with internet service providers to make sure that the highest speed broadband gets to the most remote areas of South Carolina. Hopefully the same thing is true about affordable or attainable housing. And again, we are having to educate legislators of who we mean by affordable and attainable housing or workforce housing. Right now, South Carolina has a teacher shortage. South Carolina has a shortage related to first responders. Well, just like GP said, an industry is recognizing the importance of having a variety of housing stock in their area, especially those for workers and teachers. So many school districts are recognizing to recruit teachers, the teachers need to be able to have access to affordable, attainable housing. So the constituency that's talking about housing has broadened. And so, hopefully that chorus is going to be coming forward to the legislature and talking about the importance of housing and what role the legislature can play in that conversation.
Yes, and I think it's just a great example of that this does take time. Advocacy is relationship management, more so than crisis management. But that's why these relationships and the education, because now you talk about broadband, almost every legislator has the same talking points and has said them numerous times. That's one reason broadband is a session during the summit. The director of the broadband office, Jim Stritzinger, will be leading that, as well as with Mike Shealy, who is a newer position in the Department of Admin, helping with digital equity, as well as one of our own nonprofit members, Cradle to Career, to talk about how broadband, once you have the wire in the ground, you still got to somehow get someone to buy it and use it and know how to do all that. Adoption. So, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, adoption and then use. Yeah. Because it's one thing to get the pipes in the ground. It's one thing to have the right speed, but it's another thing when family A does not have access to the devices, or that speed is not coming right to their storefront. So you have to follow it all the way to its actual use in the home or in the business. And one word about Mike Shealy and Jim Stritzinger. These are people that some of us have been working with for years. Mike used to be the chief of staff for the Senate Finance Committee, which is a place where we developed a relationship with him. Jim was working with us a couple of years ago because he had a business related to broadband access. But one of his great talents was creating these wonderful maps of where you can find broadband, where you can't. Well, and we had that relationship with him early on. Now he's leading the broadband office, and frankly, he's being seen nationally as an expert in this area. So this is just lessons for everyone going forward, that relationships you're developing now will benefit you years down the road. And you cannot guess where someone's going to end up who you might be engaging with now. So don't discount anyone that you're working with, especially from a legislative standpoint.
On the other kind of theme, Bernie, that we didn't really talk about, but has come to me during this conversation, has been the coalition building around of nonprofits. That a lot of these big issues, this isn't really attached to the legislature, but more of a trend, I think, that has been successful in the industry. And as we kind of near the end of the call, there's the Fair Lending Coalition has
Fair Lending Alliance.
Alliance, thank you. Yeah, just had their bill dropped, and which is something that's on Together SC's policy agenda, as well as many of us on the call. That's a coalition of an alliance of a lot of different nonprofits. You had the broadband. You had a couple people leading that, but a lot of folks helped drive it forward. I'm gonna mute.
Yeah, I'm on the tail end of the legislative summit calls. So
I'm gonna remind you to mute yourself if you haven't
Please
already.
mute yourself.
Yeah, so thank you for calling me back. I just felt like I
got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Found it.
And GP, can I just say that the pandemic has also raised the profile of nonprofits in general, because even in the minds of the legislators, because the nonprofit sector helped the state recover from the pandemic in a huge way. So that profile has elevated. And of course, as we're all working in coalitions and collaboratives, that strengthens the argument for the issue that we're moving forward. The Fair Lending Alliance is a tremendous example that the work for that started 2-3 years ago, laying the groundwork, figuring out who's on first, who's on second, so that now the key sponsor of the cap rate bill, which the alliance is supporting a piece of legislation that will cap interest rates in the state at 36%. We can go into details about that. Just go to the caprate.org or caprate.com. I can't remember which one, and learn about that. But it demonstrates how coalition building among nonprofits and other sectors really benefits you. Had a wonderful hearing on, I think it was Tuesday of this week. A second hearing will happen March the 1st. And the testimonies were powerful, but that is one example of a piece of an issue. There's going to be a lot of pushback from the other side. And so the nonprofit sector leaning into that, and churches and other constituents is going to really help educate legislators about the importance of capping interest rates in the state at 36%. That will prevent these payday lenders and predatory lenders from charging 300% interest on loans that they have. I'm sorry, I have to plug that.
That's not. I think the highest rate last year was 900% that was recorded in South Carolina for a payday lending loan. Criminal. Yeah. So be on the lookout for that bill. So as we wrap up, the one thing I wanted to mention, emerging is there. We won't get into emerging issues, but all of the stuff we talked about early on that has already passed the House or Senate. Education savings account, House of the abortion debate hasn't really is still live. The House has a version, the Senate has a version, the CRT, but all these things that are taking up a lot of space, all they've done so far is move to a different chamber. So it's important to remember that those conversations are not done. If you're participating in those conversations, you know that very well. But for everybody else who may have other issues in the pipeline, understand that it may have left the House, but now it's in the Senate. So now the Senate's going to have a lot of oxygen taken up by that issue. And then vice versa. The House may have been disposed of the issue, but now has a big issue from the Senate to work with. So the crossover is important to keep in mind, that while you may have now room in the House committee structure, there's another Senate bill coming, though, that maybe is going to have speed and take up oxygen. So
and GP, that crossover date is?
It's like usually April 10th-ish. So I can't remember each day. Each year.
Yeah.
So
and that's important, just because for bills that you're interested in that may be in one body right now, it has to cross over to the next body by the April 10th-ish date in order to be considered this year. But now remember, we're in a 2-year legislative session. So if it doesn't make it through this legislative year, it's still alive until next year. And you can, of course, do the groundwork off season and then be ready in January of next year.
Yeah, and there are a lot of bills, even if he makes progress, there are a lot of bills. The ESA bill in the Senate, for instance, was essentially a copy paste from last year. Even though it died, that's what helped it sail through. So any progress you make sometimes does help, even if you get past the 2-year cycle. So we have about a minute left technically. Bernie, I'll turn it over to you for any sort of final thought or, anything that SCACED would like to make sure people are aware of. And then if you've got questions, I'm happy to stick around to try to answer them, but we're going to keep everybody hopefully as close to 11 as we can. Bernie?
Well, my quick theme is that everyone has a legislator. So in other words, every legislator have constituents. Whether you know them personally or not, if they are your legislator, you are their constituent. So you should engage them. Engage them in issues that are important to you, even if they don't understand, maybe even if they don't agree with you. If you are their constituent based on their district or what have you, you should be engaging them through all the means, electronic medium, and face-to-face, of course, is the most important and valuable. One of the things I would also say is legislators are bombarded by information. They have on their plate thousands of issues in front of them. So that's why keep your information crisp, short, and sweet, and right to the point, but let them hear from you so that they can understand what's important to their constituents, and hopefully they'll move on.
Thank you, Bernie. I want to thank you. I hope Amber gets better. If you haven't registered for the conference, please do so. And we'll see you all hopefully March 7th through the 9th in Columbia. And hope everyone has a great day. And we'll go ahead and end there. I'll stick around for a couple minutes in case anyone's got specific questions. But other than that, we'll consider the webinar adjourned.
And GP, I want to thank you and Together SC for this great forum.
Thank you, Bernie. Desmond, we can probably end the recording if you'd like. All right. Thanks, Desmond, for everything. I think we're good to go. And appreciate it, all the hard work. I'll see you in Columbia.